In other words, how it started and how it's going. I thought I'd give you guys an update on what it's like to own this car, the Tesla Model Y, in the winter. I live in Toronto, Canada, and it's very comparable to most of the USA's Northeast in terms of temperatures and snowfall. It used to be the case that if you owned a Tesla, you couldn't really ignore the fact that it seemed to be designed mostly with the California climate in mind. It's not like that anymore. Let me give you my conclusion first. You don't have to watch till the end or anything. I'll tell you right now, this car is an all-around fantastic car for the winter with significant advantages versus the other cars that you might consider to be in its segment. I have some remarks about some specific drawbacks pertaining to winter driving, which you ought to know, but on the whole, it's a winner. The number one reason on my list comes from not having to fill up gas or diesel in the freezing cold. With an electric car, you don't have to have that miserable gas station experience ever again. Remember when it gets so cold that the little display of the keypad glitches out and doesn't respond as quickly? Remember changing which hand you squeeze the filler with so that you torture your hands evenly? That's all ancient history. Full range every morning, no more gas station anxiety. The other huge one is the fact that I can warm up the interior of the car from my phone 5, 10, or 15 minutes or whatever I want before the drive. And that's a pretty big deal. Unbelievably, in 2020, there are a lot of cars that don't come with a car starter as standard. Audis still don't. And they're notoriously difficult to install an aftermarket starter into it. And of course, remote starting and idling a gasoline engine is not exactly ideal either from environmental and so on. So with a Tesla, you can set the temperature, defroster, defogger, the heated seats. It's all there on the app, and with the most recent software update, you could even schedule it to happen automatically. The next big thing comes from the fact that the car doesn't have some of the strange feelings and sounds that you get from ICE cars, from internal combustion engine cars that are very cold. So ICE cars will make a whole different symphony of noises and sounds in the brutal cold. You'll get chirps if you're turning the wheel, you'll get different whirs and groans, and mostly it just makes me feel bad to drive the car because I didn't wait for it to warm up. You know, I'm feeling like I'm abusing it mechanically and diminishing the life of the car. Teslas, however, have far less complexity and moving components that are subject to temperature. You just don't get that feeling that you're doing something to the car that you shouldn't do. To be clear, Teslas don't exactly operate optimally in the cold. When it's cold, the car self-limits your power draw and the regen to the batteries. And by all accounts, to consistently let your batteries get extremely cold is detrimental for their capacity, and not everyone has a garage or the convenient at-home charging to leave it plugged in so that it may keep itself warm overnight. But at least the feeling of subjecting mechanical components and fluids and seals to thermal abuse is not there, and that makes my drive better for me. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about efficiency and specifically the effect on range, and that's a big deal. So when I got this car, I thought a fair bit about efficiency. I knew that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency range rating, is not going to be practically true. I shouldn't really use that as a guideline, right? And the car, it shows the EPA range. So I wasn't expecting it to match that because the EPA determines a rating using a scheme that is pretty evenly split between highway driving and city driving. So electric cars wind up being more efficient at city driving speeds, and highway driving becomes relatively less efficient. I'm typically covering far more kilometers on the highway than otherwise, and I'm also driving with less consideration to efficiency, and the EPA kind of assumes a very conservative driving style, right? So I always expected my dashed line to be higher than the solid rated line on this graph. This dashed line will show the car's actual consumption of energy for the past 10 or 25 or 50 kilometers. Higher means more watt hours per kilometer, so higher is worse. So in the summer and the fall, I had reached the conclusion that for my use case, I will typically see about 10 to 15% less range than the EPA rated range, maybe 20% less if I'm on an all-highway road trip, like the one I did that one time. You can check out the video up here. So when the winter weather got nearer, I was pretty sure that once I swapped in my winter rims and tires, I'd see an improved efficiency. After all, my winters are lighter, they're narrower. So I knew that there exist counterpoints to this logic, but I didn't expect what actually came to be, which was significantly lower efficiency in the winter, like significantly. My sense mostly came from this right here. So that's the range I should still have according to Tesla, and this is the range I will actually get based on the last 50 kilometers. In other words, how it started and how it's going. basically I'm getting 25 to 35% less range than the rated number. If I were to do a road trip in the winter, what would happen? Would I see a 40% range hit? So here's where I figure the efficiency loss is coming from. I guess it's important to know this because you might be able to figure out if it applies to you and if you'll see similar numbers or not. So in no particular order, as I don't know the degree of impact to each of these factors. Number one, heating up the cabin. So again, the heat pump is far more efficient than a resistive heater, but it still draws energy to keep the cabin warm. So in the spring and fall, it barely comes on at all. In the winter, of course, it's there, and I'm preheating the cabin because I can. I'm not just only starting the heat when I get in the car, and that obviously has an impact on the efficiency. So the rims and tires, right? So although I know that my winter rims are lighter than the Uber turbine wheels and it has a smaller contact patch because it's narrower, that doesn't necessarily mean it has lower rolling resistance. My assumption that I would see a bump, it didn't necessarily come to be, right? The Gemini wheels particularly are very aerodynamic rims. These rims that I put on have very thin spokes and they're definitely causing a great deal of turbulent flow and drag. And secondly, the rolling resistance is a function of the compound of the rubber and the temperature of the tire and the pavement. And in the winter, the rolling resistance may further be affected by the moisture and the snowfall. And number three is probably the main thing, though I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure. I believe it's the effect of the cold on the battery's regenerative braking regime. I noticed that the degree of regen available, which you can see on the graph, is reduced when I start my drive. So that will obviously mean I have to use the brakes more than I otherwise would have, which wastes the energy instead of capturing it. So even after a 10 or 15 minute drive in freezing conditions, in 0 or -5 conditions, the regen is still pretty low. Look at all these dots. When you have these dots, it means that the car will not regen into that range to avoid stressing the batteries. And I think that's where most of the efficiency hit is coming from. I'm doing short drives where the cabin has to be brought up to temperature, but the batteries don't quite get up to temperature in that time before I even get to my destination, right? So I think if you were typically doing longer drives, you would not fare as poorly as I am. So again, in my case, 10 to 15% less range versus EPA in the spring, summer, fall, as bad as 20% on road trips in the spring, summer, fall, and 25 to 35%, closer to 35% less range in the winter. And an unknown hit for road trips in the winter. It might just be 35 because the batteries warm up, but might be 40%. There's a video posted by Engineering Explained, and I would really recommend you watch his video if you're interested in road trips using the Tesla Model 3 in his case, but it's all applicable to the Model Y as well. Now, is this an issue for me? It's frustrating, but not really. I'm not particularly let down or anything. I had an expectation that there would be diminished range in the winter. My expectation from this car, from this technology, was that it would be specifically usable for my case where I cover between 50 and 200 kilometers a day and never more than that. So even with the reduced efficiency in the winter, this 74 kilowatt hour pack means I will never get anywhere near a low range remaining on my day-to-day use. The standard range Model Y is out and it has a 50 kilowatt hour battery pack instead of a 74. So if you're looking at that, maybe in that case, you should think a little extra hard about the effect of winter cold weather conditions, the fact that you'll give up 25 to 35% of the EPA range in Toronto weather, and you can think about whether that makes sense. And then again, there's also this bump in the battery pack for Model 3s, which should make its way to Model Y soon. And we also know that within 5 years, the tabless electrode batteries will be in these cars, which may truly make this video irrelevant at that stage. Okay, well, if you're planning to get a Tesla and you'd like to get 1,000 miles or 1,500 kilometers of free supercharging, there's a link in my video description that you can use to start your car's order, and we both get free supercharging if you do that. Lastly, I guess on the topic of winter suitability, there are a couple of things I bought for this car that are pretty important to making it a real winter weather winner. And they didn't come cheap, but here goes. So I mentioned the winter rims and tires. Those are from t-sportline. It's called the Falcon. I put Michelin X-Ice tires on this. I got these custom molded winter mats from Teslarati. They're not perfect if you have tons of snow because the water will melt and there are no ribs to protect your pant leg. And without those ribs, they're actually pretty enough to leave in year round, which is probably what I'm gonna end up doing. So all this stuff is linked below. You can probably find an affiliate link from somewhere else. These links I've got are not affiliate links. If you found this useful, please subscribe. I'm trying to get to 500 subs. That would be really cool. And also please like, share, and comment. And thank you for watching.